aka Doomwake, and he's going to break down what's going on in this matchup.
So we've seen Eric Hennig a couple of times on camera today, and the most important number for Eric is the number 5, right? You're trying to get to 5. You have Shrapnel Blast and Ensoul Artifact to either deal 5 damage or make a 5/5 creature. The most important card in Cliff's deck for this matchup is Cavalier of Thorns, because Cavalier of Thorns has a very important number in the toughness column, and that is 6, which means you can brick wall either the 5/5s, and it also does not die to a Shrapnel Blast. So I mean, this matchup is all about it's pretty much a pure race where Eric is just trying to get onto the battlefield as quick as possible. Eric does have some important interaction along the way, though. You have Torch the Towers to gild the Llanowar Elves. You have Spell Pierce to fight over stuff like Kiora. Maybe Cliff doesn't have a Nykthos draw, and Cliff has to tap out for 6 mana for a Storm. Maybe Spell Pierce can tag that. So there is some important interaction along the way for Eric. I think the Ensoul deck is a little ahead here, but Cliff being the 1 seed is on the play, and that could certainly factor in as well.
Right, and that's not even taking into consideration any amount of the we talked about the potential nut draws thanks to the ley line of the guild pack being added to this deck to really power up the Nykthos and do some of the more broken kind of turn 2 just gajillion mana alongside Sunken Citadel, which I believe we have a Sunken Citadel and maybe even a Nykthos here in this hand, but with no ley lines for Cliffbauer D, this hand's looking a little bit sketchy. Now, of course, can continue to mulligan, but on the play, a little bit less cards to work with. I believe this is already a mulligan to 6.
Yeah, I think it's 2 Elves, Kiora, Storm, Forest, Nykthos. So a relatively fine hand. You get to go turn 1 Elf, turn 2. If the Elf doesn't die, you can go Kiora, untap land, play 2nd Elf, and that can get you really, really close to a turn 3 Storm the Festival. And, the Elf did die. That's going to be a Torch
always bolt the bird
of Elf. Cliff did find another Forest, so even if the 2nd Elf dies, still able to deploy the Kiora because it does have land number 3.
Yeah, but each elf kill does do some amount to diminish the upcoming Nykthos that we know about. And of course, Eric's done a very good job of, like I said, prioritizing killing the elves over getting things like this Voldaren Epicure developed, starting the damage race as we're reaching for some tokens. Going to make a blood token off the Voldaren Epicure is Eric Hennig, and then following up with Case of the Filched Falcon, a card we've seen him do some very impressive work with over the course of this event so far. Already up to 2 artifacts is Eric Hennig. You get a look at the uncommon Case enchantment from the Murders of Karlov Manor. We get to investigate, so you see the clue joining the blood token over there. And then once we have Metalcraft, we can pay 2 and a blue to sacrifice it to put 4 counters on a artifact, and it will become a 0/0 bird token with flying as well. Now, that's non-creature artifacts, but works with the Darksteel Citadels.
Yeah, didn't quite get a good glimpse of what Cliff drew, but as of right now, we have 5 mana on the battlefield with a Storm in hand, so that's 1 mana off of potential Storm. So if Cliff can find another mana source, something like maybe, I guess Nykthos is not mana positive yet, and we do see a very important card that we talked about, Spell Pierce in hand for Eric. So even if Cliff is able to get the 6 mana, might not be able to pay for Pierce, but it looks like we found a Cavalier. That one not
maybe more important. Yeah,
not being able to target by Spell Pierce.
Yeah, and it's going to draw a card off Kiora, so there's a little bit of extra value there as we do go digging for a land to put into play. There's the look at the 5/6 reach Cavalier of Thorns, which is going to find a Besieger who endures. A lot of words on this card, part of the Cavalier cycle from M20. When it enters the battlefield, into the top 5 of your library, put a land from among them onto the battlefield. That can come in untapped if the land does. And then when it dies, you can exile it. If you do, put a card from your graveyard on top of your library. All of the modes, reach in every single one of those paragraphs matters in this mono green devotion deck, as well as the top right, using the whole buffalo as you would.
Yeah, and then, I mentioned the 5/6 being such an important number here. You see a Shrapnel Blast in Eric's hand. That can't take care of the Cavalier. Even if it could, it's not clear that Eric would want to do that. We see 3 mana lined up here. That's a Cryptic Coat. That card is powerful in the, sort of grindy matchups where they're taking a little bit longer. Maybe you get to a spot where you pick it up and replay it, but not exactly what this matchup is about. As we see, Cliff is going to untap with access to, 6 devotions. You can go Nykthos makes 6, untap, -2 is 4 + 6 is 10. I think access to 13 mana right now, which is more than enough to go Storm and pay for that Spell Pierce.
Yeah, and that looks to be exactly what we're reaching for right away, is try to start to develop some of these Storm the Festival. As you mentioned, the Spell Pierce maybe not good enough any longer, and all thanks really to the Cavalier, not only providing a blocker, but that extra 3 devotion mattering a ton here. And Kiora, of course, able to untap the Nykthos to get some a little bit more mana generation as well. Going to look at this Storm the Festival's cards. So we're going to look at the top 5, and we're going to look for cards, permanent cards with mana value 5 or less to put onto the battlefield. And then, of course, you can flash it back with 10 mana, something very common for this deck to do in the same turn.
Yeah, weirdly enough, Eric was thinking about firing off the Spell Pierce there. I actually kind of like the Spell Pierce because if you make Cliff tap the Elf in the Forest, you only have one land untapped, which means that the Kiora can untap the Nykthos, but with only one land untapped, Elf plus Nykthos, that's not enough mana to activate the Nykthos. So Cliff would still need another land to be able to do that. So maybe Eric thinks that you can hold on to the Spell Pierce and get something a little later down the road. But I mean, now we see that the Nykthos, with the ley line being hit off of the Storm of the Festival, that's going to be even more mana, which means that Spell Pierce is even farther away from being relevant.
Yeah, this Spell Pierce, I mean, I don't want to say completely expired, as we are beginning to get a little bit mana strained, but it is certainly approaching expired already here on turn 4 in the mono green deck. And maybe one of the cards we're going to reach for to sideboard out, but I don't want to speculate about that too much, as there is still a lot of Magic left to be played here. But this Cavalier posted a huge problem last turn, still a problem, and Cliff is developing his board even further with an Uvenwald Oddity already in hand, maybe looking to play and flip that as early as next turn. We'll see exactly what he wants to develop. Got a little bit of mana left to work with here if he wants to do something else with his turn right now. Not clear. He's got mana from the Outcaster Trailblazer. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and develop the Uvenwald Oddity, play and flip right now. So we actually have the mana right now floating. It was written down over there. So we're going to play it, activate it, and that puts us, I think, out of mana entirely. I just saw him scribble all that out, so I believe we used all of the mana. We're going to draw a card off Outcaster Trailblazer and a card off of Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, and now here comes Beep Beep, all of the clowns.
I'm pretty sure it's lethal.
This looks lethal to me, with Eric already at 11. The Overworld Oddity already presenting 8 of the trample damage, only 3 toughness to block with for Eric, and all the rest of the team getting that trample haste buff. I think this is very, very lethal. Going to look at Uvenwald Behemoth, the backside of Uvenwald Oddity, the trample haste 8/8. Other creatures get +1/+1, trample and haste. So that is why everything is attacking right now, and we are moving to some blocks. Is Eric Hennig. And I guess maybe we're actually at 20. I thought we were at 11 from some of the shocks and paying life, but maybe not. As here comes some blocks.
It's entirely posturing. Yeah, I was gonna say it's entirely possible we didn't have life totals updated, but even this, I mean, this is still what 5 minus 2 is 3, plus 6 is 9, plus 8 is 17.
Yeah, it's still enough.
Yeah, I think it's still lethal. Yeah, I think it might even be 20 damage.
20 exactly, huh? Well, I mean, an impressive showing from Cliff Boyardee. We saw multiple pieces of interaction actually in Eric Hennig's hand at the end of the game, right? We had Shrapnel Blast available, we had Spell Pierce available. None of them really worked. Cavalier was the problem, and then that problem snowballed into the Nykthos, and then suddenly there was too many problems to solve. So with that, a very quick game 1 going in Cliff Boyardee's favor. Eric Hennig going to have to make some changes in order to really, develop against this Mono Green Devotion deck. So we're going to take a quick look at sideboards, see what this Izzet and Soul deck has to work with. Eric Hennig's deck list, we've seen it quite a lot today, and that's because he has done a lot of winning. We're going to look at it one more time here. 3 Fiery Impulse, 3 Rending Volley, 2 Mystical Dispute, 2 Magebane Lizard, 2 the Akroan War, 2 Rampaging Frostodon, and the companion Gigantha the Wellspring. How are we sideboarding for the Mono Green Devotion deck?
So Akroan War, I believe, is mostly in the sideboard of Eric's deck, just specifically for Vein Ripper. Happens to be good against those green creatures. Remember, we talked about how problematic the Cavalier of Thorns was because you can't kill it with a Shrapnel Blast and you can't counter it with Spell Pierce. So Akroan War being a good answer to that card. I think those are coming in. The Fiery Impulses can help take care of the early Llanowar Elves. And another one that I think could be kind of interesting here is Rampaging Ferocidon. So Cliff is not gaining a bunch of life, but Cliff is putting a ton of creatures onto the battlefield on the combo turn. And remember, we talked about all this chip damage from the Ensoul Artifact deck, right? Voltarian Epicure, Spyglass Siren. You get in, one chunk of 5 with a Shrapnel Blast, maybe a chunk of 5 here with an Ensoul. And it might actually get to a spot where Cliff can't physically combo because Cliff needs to put too many creatures into play with the Ferocidon.
Yeah, I think it pairs well with the Akroan War as well, with just having Menace. So the Ferocidon could look really good. It can be a little bit slow, and slowing down maybe not necessarily the direction you want to go, especially with a lot of sideboard cards you already want. But I think it does have the potential to be very, very effective. And again, these are open deck lists and top 8, so the players know what each other's working with. So you can play a little bit of mind games about how much sideboarding you're doing if you're Eric Hennig because a lot of aggressive sideboarding would point towards a Crone War Rampaging Ferocity sideboarding, whereas less would just be the removal spells kind of stuff. So a little bit of mind games to play in that direction. And on that note, let's take a look at what Cliff Boyardee is working with and their take on Mono Green Devotion. So we've seen the list, I believe, before as well. We have 3 copies of Pick Your Poison, 3 Tail Swipe, 2 copies of the Stone Brain, 2 Unlicensed Hearse, 1 Emrakul the Promised End, 1 Obstinate Baloth, 1 Cityscape Leveler, 1 Arasta of the Endless Web, and 1 Tranquil Thrillback. What kind of sideboarding do we want to do against this? Is it in Soul deck?
So pick your poison, very, very good. We've seen that a couple of times come up, being able to target things like Darksteel Citadel and Soul Artifact, Case of the Filched Falcon, just phenomenal card all around. Tail Swipe is interesting because it doesn't line up the best against the Ensoul Artifact stuff, but it does line up pretty well against Inti and some of the other smaller creatures. So I think it's still good enough to board in past the Pick Your Poisons and the Tail Swipes. You could maybe consider something like Tranquil Frillback to be able to pop an artifact or enchantment, although that one's a little bit more mana intensive. Past that, I think that's pretty much all that Cliff is looking at, though.
Yeah, you mentioned not a lot of life game. I guess Tranquil Fieldback, things like Obstinate Baloth could gain life as well if that's a direction that Cliff Barty wants to go. But then maybe you're running face first into the Ferocidon. So a little bit, again, of some leveling that needs to be done as both players are aware of what each other is working with here. Shuffling up here for game number 2. Cliff Boyardee, you can see there, up a game against Eric Hennig here in the semifinals of our Pioneer 5K trial. Remember, this is our last event of the season. Next event will start season 2. And that's going to be in Chicagoland. We're going to be returning to another modern showdown there. Opportunities to qualify for the Energy Championship every single weekend here on the NRG series. And our end of the year championship also has a leaderboard with some points at large. And we got some people in the thick of the end of season fight, even still in our top 8, namely, of course, Garrick Alford, who is trying to usurp the Connor Mullally, who lost in top 8 and is currently primed to get the second seat in the Energy Championship from the season 1 points. So a little bit of a mouthful there, but basically Garrick Alford, if he wins the whole event, well, he also wins an invite to the Energy Championship, despite this event being a trial, not a showdown. A little bit more on the line for him.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of exactly how you draw it up, right? Towards the end of the season, you just have this event where you have a lot of the players who are in contention for that end of the year season. And we even have 2 of them all the way in the top 4, and they are both still playing for, well, Harrison already locked up his spot, like you mentioned, but Garrick's still playing for a lot right now. And that's kind of exactly how you would want to draw it up as we see Leyline of the Guild Pack. That is the start that Eric does not want to see.
No, he does not. You saw him lean back in the chair, a little bit of shoulder posturing there. Very visibly not excited to see Leyline of the Guild Pack because that is really the card that enables some of the more broken draws. You see this nonsense mana cost of this Leyline of the Guild Pack, but actually amounts to 4 green pips if you choose to, which means 4 green devotion for your Nykthos, which we do see a copy of Nykthos for Cliff Boyardee. Does not have it available here on turn 2, but has it in play right now as Eric has developed his kind of namesake, Darksteel Citadel, a second one alongside Steam Vents, insouling the first one. And here comes a 5/5 indestructible on turn 3.
It's not bad. That's definitely a good start here for Eric. Cliff, we did see the copies of Pick Your Poison. And what's interesting about this is, there are 2 Darksteel Citadels in play. So if Cliff were to fire off Pick Your Poison, we'd probably want to name enchantment and not artifact, because Eric would very likely just sacrifice that extra Citadel in play. So we'll have to see what Cliff does decide to do. Maybe it's okay with, but you're going to go for the install. I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
And notably misses a land drop here, does Cliff Boyardee, and that really disrupts a lot of the way he wants to develop. Right now, he has to develop this Elvish Mystic in order to even enable the Nykthos for next turn, which opens up Eric for a little bit more time to get some of his damage going. And if he does, then we see a copy of Shrapnel Blast in hand that could really start to go to work.
Yeah, interesting decision there for Eric. If you look at Eric's hand, there is a copy of Fiery Impulse. So could have decided to go for Fiery Impulse on the elf, especially after the missed land drop, but instead decides to deploy the Gear Drake, likely also going to end up sacrificing the clue token end of turn. But This is going to mean Cliff has access to a boatload of mana, so we can go Nykthos for 5, use 3 of it, untap the Nykthos, now Nykthos for 6. That gives us enough to cast basically anything, and Cliff definitely has anything in hand. You could even go Trailblazer into Old Growth Troll, could also just deploy the Cav. I actually kind of like Trailblazer into Troll here, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely thinking about it. I mean, I don't know. I think both paths are really strong. Obviously, you get more cards if you go the Trailblazer into the Old Growth Troll, because you get one from the Outcaster Trailblazer and the Kiora Behemoth Beckoner. So we're going to get a card, the Trailblazer, right away. So that happens right now. And if we find a land, we can play that as well. And we also get the mana from the Outcaster Trailblazer. So what's our follow-up here? Because I think if we hit a land right, we actually could do the Cavalier after the Trailblazer. But
Oh
now
my
we
goodness.
bricked. So here comes another Outcaster Trailblazer, and you see
Oh,
Eric leaning back. Yeah, I wonder now if he really wishes he picked off that Elvish Mystic with the Fiery Impulse and maybe stopped some of this from happening. As here comes an Old Gold Troll after the fact. So this was a great turn from Cliff Boyardee and a pile of cards coming. Ancestral Recall off your
yeah, I
creature.
mean, just imagine if Eric just had just fired off that elf. Cliff would have only untapped with a Force and a Nykthos, and Cliff would have just said go, as opposed to putting 12 power into play. And it's certainly a decision point whether you want to develop or make or kind of stunt Cliff's development a little bit. But yeah, Eric definitely maybe regretting that decision at this point.
Yeah, tough spot for him now. Ton of cards to work with. Gear Drink in hand. No blockers for that right now. So there's a chance we can start to set up, double. You mentioned double, triple shrapnel blast with all these citadels and all this mana to work with. Not clear exactly. I know we have one. I can't get a great look at the other stuff we have to work with for Eric Hennig. I believe it is a Spyglass Siren. Yeah, okay, Spyglass Siren. That can grow the Gear Drake quite a bit, right? Because we can sacrifice the map, which will trigger the Gear Drake heads up, and then whatever happens with the map happens.
Right. So you could see the map, and then that still holds up the shrapnel blast as well. With Cliff on 15, looks like Eric hit a land. So 3-3, that's going to put Cliff to 12. The shrapnel blast theoretically has Cliff on 7. And Eric thinking about just passing. No attacks here from the Gear Drake, yet at least. We're still thinking. No, we are just going to pass. Interesting.
Nope. Yeah, no attacks to the Gear Drake. So maybe a little bit worried about just getting back cracked with an Uvenwald oddity from 18. Definitely seems a little bit frustrated with his draw. Flooded out, I believe, has Eric Hennig, finding yet another land off the map. Needs another copy of Shrapnel Blast really to be in this game. Honestly, two of them would lock it up, right? Two of them is just like, sack all my things. You're at 15, now you're dead. But I mean, with none of that, really only one of the 3 needed available in Eric Hennig's hand. And here comes Cavalier of Thorns, which shuts down any Gear Drake attacks. That's looking like it's going to really start to stymie any of the incidental damage this Ensoul deck can start to produce. And now we have to start looking at, okay, well, what kind of direct damage do we have access to? Only one Shrapnel Blast right now needs help.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Cliff's hand, and this Nykthos is going to be just basically like a giant dark ritual. I'm not even convinced that Eric's going to get another turn. I'm pretty sure that Cliff can just cycle through a bunch of stuff and probably just kill Eric this turn. Well, if we're getting a layer, that might not be the case, because if you had other plans to do with the mana, you'd probably just want to get the Nykthos. But I think Cliff has another Nykthos in hand anyway, so maybe that's not even necessarily true. But the hand is actually not super great for Cliff. I think it's pick your poison, 2 Kiora's ley line, and a bunch of lands. So not a lot of action here for Cliff.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, a ton of mana, maybe not that much action to work with. And Storm of the Festivals, I'd say Storm of the Festival really the card that Cliff is looking for, really to set off his draw. That's really kind of what gets things snowballing, being able to play and flash that back when you have access to all this mana. Going to play his land for turn as the Forest. The other land, that layer, was found off of a Cavalier. So that one was a little bit, not cheated into play, but was not used as a land drop, as here comes another copy of Leyline, which will be functionally free as we tap this Nykthos for a rebate on that 4 mana. So a pile of mana for Cliff. What is the follow-up? Any oddities? Oh, nope, maybe not. Maybe not tapping it.
Looks
What are
like
we
we
doing here?
are not sure. Again, I'm pretty sure I got a reasonable glimpse at Cliff's hand, and I don't think I saw anything super duper payoffy. Looks like we're gonna pick your poison. That's going to go after not a great lot of great options. Flyer, you sack the Siren. Artifact, you sack a land. So we're going to
Well, it had
sacrifice
to be
that
Flyer,
Siren.
so we sack the Siren, right? That's the only way we
Yep.
get the Siren.
Right. Yep.
And that means, I mean, we do have a Boseiju left over, and we're attacking with some 4-power creatures. I think we can shrapnel blast face, sacrifice an artifact, grow the gear drake, and that gives us a 4/4 flyer. So that's going to pick off the old growth troll.
Hmm.
And now we have a 4/4 flyer. We interested in blocking. Looks like the answer is no. So we're going to use that mana to go ahead and channel Besiju Who Endures, targeting that Gear Drake, which will allow Eric to go find a land, but gets the blocker out the way. So here comes some damage. Cavalier still on defense, and now down one of the shrapnels. Cliff at 15. Looks like this game's going to go on for quite a bit. And with Cliff having 10 power in play, I mean, it feels like he failed, right? It feels like he didn't quite get there or whatever. But he actually could, I think, could still present lethal with the Lair of the Hydra next turn if there's no creatures in play.
Right. Yeah. Now Eric, without the shrapnel blast, doesn't have any threats in play. Not really in a position to pressure Cliff's life total whatsoever. And unfortunately, I think there might just be 4 lands. No, looks like 3 lands and a copter. But
Three lands and a copter. Yeah,
really
that's no
rough draws
creatures.
here. Rough draws here for Eric. Not a lot to work with.
I mean, really, we mentioned his deck churns through cards so well with cards like Inti and cards like Smuggler's Copter, but all of these cards really have been absent from the games we've watched, and this Copter too late to the party to really get any work done. And now I believe, I don't know if it's straight lethal on board, but it looks close. Nykthos, activate Nykthos, and then activate it, untap it with Kira, activate it again, pump the layer up for a gajillion. Yeah, and that's what we're going to do right now. We see him reaching for mana. Yeah, that's going to be 18, or sorry, 13, and that's going to be lethal. So Eric Hennig is going to be felled here in the semifinals versus Cliff Boyardee, and his mono green devotion deck is going to advance to the finals of our Pioneer 5K trial here in St. Louis. And now it comes down to the Canfer versus Alfred matchup. 2 leaderboard players. We have Amalia versus Control, and we're going straight live to game 2 of the backup feature match. That is that matchup I just spoke to, Amalia versus Control. A great run from Eric Hennig and his Is It in Soul deck, but the wheels certainly fell off here against the Mono Green Devotion deck. We'll see Cliff again in the finals here in a moment. And right now we are live here in game number 2. You can see Garrick Alford won game 1, but finds himself at 8, facing down a whole host of power on the other side of the field for Harrison Canfer. So we'll see exactly where things are at in this game, but things don't look to be going well for Garrick as Harrison's moving to untap. That's a lot of power in play for Garrick being at 8.
Yeah, I was going to say before we came into this matchup that Amalia is traditionally really, really bad against Azorius Control. And we do kind of see that a little bit unfold as Garrick did take game number 1. But Harrison in a really good spot. And we came at an interesting time because Garrick is just conceding and we are going to game number 3.
I mean, what more could you want, right? We can start fresh game number 3, all the marbles. Remember, Garrick Alford does need to win this event if he wants to punch his ticket to the end of year championship, which means getting through Harrison Canfer, who is ahead of him on the leaderboard as it stands right now and has already earned his end of year championship invite, as he can no longer be passed with the points from this event. So we're going to be moving to game 3 between those players. And if we can get a chance to look at their deck lists, before we go in, it looks like the answer is yes. So again, we've seen these players before. We've seen the Amalia deck specifically from Harrison Canfer in the past, and we've also seen the blue-white control deck from Garrick as well previously. So once again, going to take a look at the Amalia Cyber. We have 4 copies of Thoughtseize, 4 copies of Fatal Push, 2 copies of Liliana of the Veil, 1 Even Interrupter, 1 Haywire Might, 1 Knight of Dusk's Shadow, 1 Skyclave Apparition, and 1 Get Lost. What do you like against the Garrick Alford control matchup?
All right, so 4 copies of Thoughtseize slam dunks against the control deck, the 2 Lilianas, and the Aven Interrupter. Very good at fighting over things like, the Wraths and whatnot, maybe that buy you that one crucial turn. You could consider Get Lost as an answer, I guess Haywire Met as well, as answers to a temporary lockdown, because you take a look at Harrison's deck list, there's a lot of 2-mana creatures, so potentially want some answers to that lockdown as well. But yeah, the Thoughtseizes and the Lilianas for sure probably wants the Might and the Get Lost.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Let's take a very quick look at Garrick Alfred's control deck. We've seen it before. We have 4 Cutzel's Flankers, 3 Mystical Dispute, 3 Regal Caracal, 2 Shark Typhoon, 2 Temporary Lockdowns, and the Kahira Companion. What do you like against Amalia?
Lockdowns for sure, and maybe
that it?
Flanker? I mean, I guess Flanker is good against the Lively Dirge Return of the Rank stuff, so maybe you want to go towards that, but you probably wouldn't want to go super heavy on Flanker, maybe like 2 copies, but the lockdowns are slam dunks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Being able to hate that graveyard after something like a Supreme Verdict can be a really big deal. And of course, the rest of your sweepers, the Sunfalls, the Farewells that you see there in the main deck do actually just take care of things without any real recourse from things like Lively Dirge or Return to the Ranks. So straightforward enough. This matchup we've seen before in Pioneer. Both of these players' decks we have seen before as well. And I believe Garrick here on a mulligan to 6. We'll see if he's interested in keeping that 6. He is on the play. And Canfer has found a 7 he likes. So down a few cards already is Garrick as he starts with a tapped Hollowed Fountain, just a passing of the turn. A little bit more fireworks here for Canfer as here's a Send Out Scout, which finds a land.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, this matchup is really interesting because I think that the combo, it's weird because the combo is actually not that good against blue-white control, where what ends up happening is, so there's a couple of things where you basically just let Harrison go off, like you let Harrison gain a bunch of life, because part of the combo means that you have to wrath the rest of your board. So you get into a spot where Harrison combos, has a giant Amalia, wraths the rest of his entire board, and Garrick says, okay, you're at 80 life, I'll just kill your Amalia, and then I'll eventually kill you at my leisure. The Garrick doesn't really need to get the game over with in any capacity. So it's one of the few matchups where the combo actually kind of doesn't matter.
Interesting. So yeah, combo not mattering, the beatdowns matter, and I'm sure the combo not mattering is a big part of this matchup being traditionally considered to be difficult. Now, of course, Garrick on a mulligan and cashing out the Narset here, looking for some spells to help. 3 steps ahead among the mix. Already a little bit under some pressure. Send Out Scout plus Sentinel the Nameless City. Really Sentinel, I think the card gluing a lot of this deck together, both being just very good on rate as a 3/4 with Vigilance that attacks, makes some maps, tokens, all that kind of stuff, but also, can help trigger the combo, right? The Explorers from the map tokens do set off the combo in a meaningful way, and that is an effect that you do need access to. So very much the glue that holds this deck together. Looks very impressive right now. Now, Get Lost, the draw for Canfer does make Temporary Lockdown look a little bit worse, but I don't see any Temporary Lockdowns right now. And under some pressure already is Garrick Alford.
Yeah, and because the combo is essentially just, I'm not going to say it's offline. Like there's maybe some rare circumstances where it could end up mattering, and it is a possibility that maybe Harrison, trimmed on some of the combo. The kind of the main game plan for Harrison is just play some creatures and sort of this flash style game with Collected Company and Court of Calling. One really important part about Sentinel of the Nameless City, which is a card that is a 2 of in Harrison's deck list, Vigilance, because Garrick has a bunch of copies of the Wandering Emperor, and one important thing about Vigilance is you don't have to worry about attacking into the Emperor, because the Emperor only targets tapped creatures.
Right. And that, I mean, like you said, big deal there. The Wandering Emperor, one of the best ways to kind of use your mana, trade favorably, and then untap with a Planeswalker that can really start to snowball the game. Here we actually had our other kind of namesake 4-drop in the form of Memory Deluge to kind of start to get the cards going. So this is going to recover a little bit from the mulligan. But again, the life totals here are not correct. Garrick has taken quite a bit of damage already from the creatures in play. Going to take a little bit more with the shock off the Hollowed Fountain. 5 mana is impressive, and no play beyond that. Had the option to play Teferi, chose not to. Collected Company on instep here. Going to find a Dovin's Veto.
Yeah, that was an interesting spot for Harrison, where Harrison could have cast the Collected Company while Garrick was tapped out after the Memory Deluge, but it's one of those situations where if you do it, then you're running into Verdict, even if you get to resolve the Coco. So it's always that weird tension of, it's like, do you want to do it now, or do you want to wait? And Harrison decided to wait and ran, and Garrick did have the Dovin's Veto. Now we're attacking with both. It's going to deal some damage to Garrick, and like you mentioned, Garrick doesn't have. Eventually we're going to need to wrath this board. It gets to a certain point where you can let it go for a little while, but you can't let it go forever. As we see, Court of Calling going to be X equals, looks like 2. I wonder what that's getting.
And we mentioned before too how important it is not to tap your Sentinel the Nameless City. So it feels you feel incentivized to tap it here for this chord and not tap your Mana Confluence for damage. Just save a little bit of damage. Actually, very heads up, not tapping the Sentinel the Nameless City to cast this chord, so you're not opening yourself up to the Wandering Emperor. As here comes, I believe 5 mana, 3 steps ahead with, of course, the other spree mode of draw 2, discard 1, and it's going to be No More Lies hits the bed.
Yeah, that's an interesting spot because we know that players do. What's interesting to note, players do have open deck lists, and Harrison is aware of the two copies of Censor and the one copy of Droid Disruption. That could be a reason to tap the Sentinel there, but just
Sure.
valuing making sure you because making sure that you have that Sentinel untapped to player on the Wandering Emperor.
Yeah, and that's really it's a decision point that looks to be kind of minor, but in the grand scheme can matter a lot in these kinds of matchups. As here does come the Sentinel of the Nameless City, going to make some more map tokens. Synod Scout, missing attack for 5 is a 2-turn clock. The answer kind of has to come now. Like Garrick is out of time to play around with these counter spells and all this stuff and just take the hits. He now has to answer what is in play, and Harrison continuing to leave mana up, potentially problematic for assembling some in-step 5 power. It's all he needs. Very small bar to cross if you have something like another collected company.
Yeah, I saw a copy of Sunfall in Garrick's hand, which it looks like he is going to reach for, but I wonder what the last 2 mana available is here for Garrick. I'm sure there's probably something, or at least for Garrick's sake, there's got to be something here. I guess at the worst case scenario, you can flip the incubator token to make a 2/2 chump blocker if a collected company does show up here for Harrison. And with 5 mana available, could also consider Chord of Calling for 2. Maybe get something like a Deep Cavern Bat or perhaps an Amalia, and it looks like it is going to be that Chord.
Yeah, so we have Chord, and if we grab a 2 power creature that flies or whatever, and then we crack all 3 maps, there's a potential to assemble lethal, but the incubator token that we see right now could get in the way of that. Now, we of course that doesn't take into consideration anything that could be in Garrick Alfred's hand, so this might be a tough decision for Canfor in some kind of meaningful way. And like you said, he might go for a bat just for that reason alone, but no, does choose to go for Amalia. So
What's
that card.
what's funny here is I actually kind of think Harrison wanted to get the Dina, but if you look at the graveyard, the Dina actually got milled over by a map earlier. So what happens in these spots is you deal a lot of chip damage early, and when you get to these spots where Dina and some random creatures can just be enough triggers to just sort of burn Garrick out. But without access to the Dina, cannot really, since that's only a one of in the deck, that's in the graveyard, cannot go towards that.
Yeah, and that is exactly the problem, like you mentioned. And here is the Prosperous Innkeeper, which is going to get some stuff started as far as getting some explorers from Amalia. So we'll see if Garrick wants to move yet. Looks like the answer is no. And there's
Hmm,
Extraction Specialist,
I
which can
spoke too
bring
soon.
back the Dina. Yeah, you said Dina's off the clock here. Not quite, as here's Extraction Specialist, and to his head goes his hands
And
for Garrick Alfred. Look at Extraction Specialist, 3/2 life linker. In this battlefield, return a creature mana value 2 or less from graveyard to the battlefield. That includes Dina.
yeah, and what's interesting about this is you can actually stack the triggers, right? So you can put the Prosperous Innkeeper life gain trigger on the stack, resolve the Specialist trigger first. That brings back the Dina. The Dina will then see both Innkeeper triggers because you'll get one off the Specialist and one off the Dina.
Yeah, that appears to be exactly what's happening right now. So we have assembled quite the attack force. And as you mentioned, those Dina triggers says whenever you gain a life, each opponent loses a life. And with Garrick at 5 and Amalia potentially growing. Now remember, Amalia is the only creature that can attack. So whatever damage the Dina deals, Amalia has to be the thing to finish it off. But we do have a blocker in the form of the Phyrexian that can be created here. So uh, gonna be tough to assemble lethal, I think, but we do have some map tokens to try to punch that through with some, I guess, not Amalia combo per se, but maybe just some Amalia reach of some kind, do some exploring, getting some life, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the only creature that can currently attack is the Amalia.
Right.
So unless Harrison can remove that blocker with Besagi, but there's a Besagi in play, and I believe that's only a one of. So that's going to be off the table.
But we have
Um,
March.
okay. So presumably Garrick probably has to march the Dina, I think.
Okay, so,
Because it's
yeah,
just
I
too much
guess.
chip damage if you don't kill the Dina.
But we have a Supreme Verdict in hand. So can
Okay.
we get the Amalia and hope that we can weather whatever's here now? Because we're not taking any attack damage and just verdict array everything else. Leave Camphor with some map tokens and 1 card in hand?
If you target the Amalia, you lose because the award pay 3 life would put Garrick down to 2. The Amalia
Mm-hmm.
would die, but then you would still have 2 life gain triggers on the stack with the Dina.
Sure. So we do actually have to go after the Dina.
You
There's no other
have to kill the
choice.
Dina, yep.
Yeah, and
Which
that's
is
okay.
well,
Sniff
this
that
is
out, did Garrick.
it's also really awkward because now there's 2 life gain triggers on the stack. Amalia can attack if there's a spell that's just lethal because you keep the spell on top, 1, second life gain, that's 2, and then pop the map that makes a 5/5 Amalia, I believe.
Right, but yeah, you're right. And then we don't have.
Ooh,
I
okay.
guess we chose to graveyard the innkeeper, so we actually don't have
Interesting.
lethal yet.
I don't think Harrison's played a land though, so Harrison could play the Overgrown Tomb, untap, pop 2 maps, and try to find 1 spell that way.
But we had a spell. I don't.
Yeah, I maybe Harrison just didn't, maybe miscounting and didn't quite do the math, potentially, or not sure exactly.
Unclear. I mean, also does play a little bit around second March, I guess. Like you don't want to put
Yeah.
all your eggs in one basket potentially. As here comes 3 points of damage down to 2. Goes Garrick Alford. Has to be kind of a sigh of relief. He's not dead.
Yeah, this is interesting. And now you mentioned Garrick does have that sweeper as well. So, I mean, that's going to clean up the battlefield and not sure exactly what, what Harrison has for leftovers. And yeah, but this
Couple
has been
lands
a
from the
very,
maps.
very interesting game. There's the verdict.
So here we go. We have Supreme Verdict. So we are reaching for the verdict here, which is going to clean up the leftovers. Now, lots of artifacts left behind for campers. So, if he has even just a single another creature, we really can get things started again, despite weathering through a Sunfall and a Supreme Verdict. But there is some pressure on him to have something.
Yeah, and I go back to that last turn where Harrison binned that first spell. I wonder if maybe just didn't quite do the math, or like you said, maybe was wanting to play around a second March. And funny enough, I think Garrick did have the other March too. I don't know if that was drawn for the turn, but I think I saw a second March in Garrick's hand. So maybe Garrick just had everything covered anyways.
Yeah, I mean, that's very, very possible. Like I said, I mean, playing around second March, that's kind of what the mana represents a little bit if you're not just going to reach for the blocker. And, there's some temptingness to reach for the blocker, if you will, and go ahead and get that chump block. But here does come a Prosperous Innkeeper. And with some maps dialed up, we can control the draw step a little bit. Yeah, you're right. So it was another March of Otherworldly Light. So we actually did have it. So super heads up there from Harrison. Going to exile the Prosperous Innkeeper, which means the maps aren't going to do anything. Liliana the Veil, the only leftovers. And now huge draw step potential here for Garrick. If he can get something going, we can work through this Liliana the Veil and really start to stabilize this game from 2 life, but needs to have some good draw steps, get lost, and an unknown draw. Get a good look as Liliana goes rolling up.
Yeah, the Liliana is ticking up. That's going to get rid of a Supreme Verdict. And I didn't see the Deluge. That's huge for Garrick.
I mean, we did cast it earlier, if we remember, where he was recovering from the mulligan. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, this is really the turn the corner spot for Garrick. I said this before. Anytime we see a Flashback Memory Deluge in this Pioneer control deck, that's really where we start to turn the corner. You get to look at the top 7, take 2, and against Liliana the Veil, it's just the card you want. You get to look for, more cards, not only just discard, but potential answers as well. Recover from the card disadvantage of Liliana of the Veil herself, and start to snowball the game in your favor. I see Get Lost among the mix, which could be a good answer to the Liliana. Yeah, we're going to fire that off right now. And Harrison's own Get Lost doesn't really add anything to that.
Get that Liliana out of here.
Garrick everybody's lost. All these maps, all this exploring, and somehow still everybody's lost. As here is the Wandering Emperor as a follow-up.
Yeah, and that is going to maybe close out the game relatively quickly here for Garrick. Harrison's going to really need some really big top decks. And, I mentioned this earlier. One of the easiest ways for Harrison to kind of cross the finish line in spots like this is with that chip damage from Dina, right? Like, you see Garrick at 2 life. If you say Dina and some random life gain, that can just, 2 triggers off the Dina. But with that Dina exile, that is not even an option here for Harrison anymore.
Yeah, and Selfless Saver doesn't add a lot. I mean, we can start to crack these maps, start to control some of our draw set, but doesn't really add a lot to the mix for Harrison. I think we feel the urgency from Garrick Alford here. He is, using this Wandering Emperor, just creating an attack force, trying to get this game over with as quickly as possible before things get worse. Something like Return the Ranks comes out, Lively Dirge. There's live draws that are very problematic for Garrick, and you can see he's really pushing
to get
the game over with as quick as he can. Yeah, there's Collected Company. That one's a problem.
Yeah, that is exactly what Harrison is looking for, and I don't think there's a counter spell in Garrick's hand. I'm not exactly sure.
Is Field of Ruin a May? Can we use that to disrupt the top of the library?
Oh, right. Field of Ruin's not a May, so he can force the shuffle with that. That's a good point.
Okay, so we got an option if that's a direction we want to go. I mean, Garrick, yeah, we're taking a moment to pause here. Actually, going to cash out the Wandering Emperor, creating another 2/2. So right now we have a
Love it.
two-turn clock with what can attack right now. Adding another 2/2 to the mix can help with that as well. 2 cards in hand, 3 cards in hand. Don't have a great look. 3 mana being tapped. It's Field of Ruin. Yeah, like we said,
Yep.
this is going to be one of the ways to disrupt that top of the library. We know the collecting company is what he wants to draw. Yeah, Field of Ruin, as you mentioned, not a May. So each player is going to go searching for a basic because they must. And Harris Camper is going to find, does have a Plains, as does Garrick. But no longer do we know the top of the library. That map value diminished a little bit.
Yep. So Harrison playing off the top here, not exactly sure what the leftovers are for. This is, by the way, this has just been a phenomenally played game by both players. Like you saw that turn where Harrison, set up the Dina and all that stuff. Garrick just played perfectly to make sure that was able to have exactly enough resources to make sure to weather the storm. And very, very well played game by both players. And I believe that might have been an Amalia, which is not the worst draw step here. You have, I guess we already used all the,
Yeah, we
all
used
the
all the
maps.
maps. That's kind of
So,
tough. But I mean, it still is a blocker, right? And we see Garrick getting very aggressive with the Wandering Emperor, and we have another one to help with exactly that. So we can create yet another attacker. That one's back. Welcome back. This Samurai, and we get to untap, activate, pump some stuff. And like I said, Garrick's really trying to get aggressive. So just a blocker here is meaningful in some way. Now, does Garrick have a way to clear out some of the blockers that Harrison is presenting? I think we have an anchorage that we can maybe. No, that's the deserted beach. So actually, we're just going to cast this Memory Deluge instead. Go looking for some removal spells. See what we have access to. Can't see. Garrick's keeping us hanging here, close to the chest, as things are heating up in game 3 here.
Worth noting with Garrick at 2 life cannot pay for the ward cost on Amalia, so removal spell would likely need to be some kind of sweeper, which actually, kind of awkward because Garrick wants to keep the 2/2s in play, doesn't really want to sweep the board here. So we might even see, yeah, I love it. Just attack with everything. The dog gets to, block one of the samurais, but the Amalia has no other good blocks, and Harrison might just fall to 2 right here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you might be just priced into using this Amalia to block with Harrison at 8 here. We fall to 2, keeping the Amalia back's kind of tough. And like I said, a removal spell, actually, we could have gone after the Selfless Savior. That could have been potentially forcing a block, but
I'm going to pull up the text on Get Lost. I think you can blow up your own stuff, right? Yeah, destroy. Okay, so you could theoretically get lost one of your own things, like get lost the Savior and then use 2 maps to get the Amalia. I don't know if that's worth it, but that is at least something to consider just to be able to go a little bit deeper. But I guess that's not good because you want the Savior at least checks all these 2/2s in place. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think you definitely value the 4/4 over trying to grow your Amalia or whatever. If you could gain life, I'm sure that would be, if they were like food, that would be actually worth it if they made food instead of maps. But unfortunately, they do not. They only make map tokens. And here comes Kahira adding to the attack force. Both players at 2 now. A massive draw step potential for Harrison. Things like Collecting Company, Return to the Ranks, worth quite a bit. He's been through a lot of that stuff. Doesn't look happy. And it doesn't look happy at all with this draw step. So maybe a brick? Oh,
see what we got, Harrison.
The drama. It's an extended hand. Garrick Alfred bailed out by those March of Otherworldly Lights from what looked to be no good roads here. The March of Otherworldly Light and its pitch ability allowed him to stabilize the game, turn the corner, Memory Deluge, all the like, and he advances to the finals. Member of Team Flex Slot, and again, number 9 on our leaderboard coming to this weekend. And now, if he wins this entire event, has the potential to punch his ticket to the end of the year NRG Championship. So we are going to, I believe, take a quick break before we move to the finals. It seems like the players are going to take a little bit of a bathroom break before we do get started in the finals, so it may be just a couple minutes. But like I said, it's all or nothing as far as Garrick Alfred's NRG Championship prospects are concerned. He's played very well throughout the event. We've now watched him on camera, I believe, 3 separate times. Each time, incredibly close matchups, incredibly tight play from Garrick, and I'm very excited to see these finals coming up against Cliff Boyardee on Mono Green Devotion here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. We'll be bringing you the final match of our Pioneer 5K trial very shortly.